Have you ever stopped to think about what really happens the moment we leave this world? I'm not talking about what religion teaches, nor what science usually repeats, but rather something deeper, something that crosses cultures and generations. There's an ancient revelation, told in sacred texts and confirmed by one of modern history's greatest psychics, Edgar Cayce. He said that, upon dying, each of us faces a book of life, a meticulous record that shows, unfiltered, everything we've lived, thought, and felt. But what would this book be? A judgment? A punishment? Or perhaps an opportunity that few truly understand? The mere thought of a cosmic record that holds every detail of our existence sends shivers down the spine. After all, if it were true, what would it show about us? Our flaws, our mistakes, our little lies, or also the silent acts of kindness that no one else saw? The big question is that this book of life isn't just a metaphor, as many believe. For Edgar Cayce, it had a name, the Akashic Records, a kind of spiritual library where everything that has ever happened and everything that will still happen is stored. And, according to him, that's where we return after death, like students returning to the classroom to review a lesson. Perhaps you're wondering, why do we need to review everything we've done? Wouldn't it be enough to simply leave and rest? But Cayce's answer was clear. Life isn't just a stroll, it's a school. And like any school, it has tests, lessons, and reviews. The book of life is exactly that. The final review of a journey, where there's no cheating, no escaping, because the only truth that appears there is the one we ourselves wrote with our choices. This idea, however uncomfortable it may seem, also brings a certain relief. Because according to Cayce, no one judges us from outside. There's no grumpy judge, no heavenly tribunal. The one who looks at the book is ourselves. Imagine that moment. Suddenly you find yourself before a screen. Some near-death experience accounts describe it exactly like this. There you are, reliving not only what you did, but also what others felt because of your actions. If you once hurt someone, you feel the pain you caused. If you once helped in silence, you feel the gratitude that bloomed in the other person's heart. There's no escaping, because every detail returns. And this doesn't happen as punishment, but as learning. It's as if life is saying, see, these were your choices. What did you learn from them? And here's a point few people realize. When Cayce spoke about this book of life, he wasn't referring to something distant, reserved only for the moment of death. He said that access to these records can also happen in life, through dreams, intuitions, and visions. How many times have you felt that something you were about to do simply wasn't right? Or conversely, that a difficult path seemed inevitable, but deep down you had a strange certainty that it was necessary. For Cayce, these signs are echoes of the book of life, memories of what we've already learned in other journeys, and that continue to guide us now. But there's an even more intriguing detail. If everything is written in this record, is our future also already determined? The idea of a fixed destiny can sound frightening, as if we're just pieces on a chessboard. However, Cayce affirmed that the future isn't recorded as something immutable. The book of life holds the possibilities, and every decision we make opens or closes paths. It's like a tree with thousands of branches. The roots are in the past, but the next branch depends on the direction we choose to follow. This vision completely transforms how we view our daily choices. Now think with me, if this record indeed exists, and if upon dying we will have to confront it, how are we writing the pages of our story today? Are we aware that every gesture, however small it may seem, has an eternal weight? Many people only start to reflect on this in old age, when they feel time shortening and death approaching. But Cayce said that it's never too late, because every moment, even the last, can still be an act of learning, reconciliation, and love. And it's precisely this understanding that gives meaning to the idea of the book of life. It's not a burden we carry, but a continuous opportunity for growth. It's curious to observe how this vision dialogues with so many spiritual traditions. The Bible, for example, speaks of the book of life in several passages, where the names of the righteous would be written. Other traditions speak of celestial records or eternal archives. Cayce, however, brought this idea into an accessible language for the modern world, connecting it to psychology, spirituality, and even concepts that resemble quantum physics. He didn't speak of a physical book, but of an energy field, a kind of universal memory where nothing is lost. Perhaps you're thinking, but how could anyone be sure of something like this? Life after death remains one of humanity's greatest mysteries. Edgar Cayce, however, was no ordinary theorist. He was known as the sleeping prophet because he would enter a trance and answer complex questions about health, past lives, and human destiny. And what's impressive is that many of his readings, done for ordinary people, described exactly this encounter with the book of life after death. He spoke of it with such clarity that it didn't seem to be a belief, but a certainty. And here arises the big question I leave for you. If it were true that upon departing, you will have to open this book and review everything you've lived, how would you like that reading to be? This is the central provocation Cayce leaves us with, and it's also the thread that will guide this conversation of ours. Because the answer isn't just in believing or doubting, but in understanding how this revelation can transform the way we live the present. Now that we've understood the central idea of the Book of Life, we need to delve into the heart of Edgar Cayce's revelation. He described this moment after death not as a distant or symbolic scene, but as a concrete, almost inevitable experience. According to his readings, the soul upon leaving the physical body passes through a state of transition in which it detaches from the limitations of time and space. It's at this stage that the record begins to open, as if a curtain were lifted and the totality of our life lay before us. But it's not a cold, emotionless display. On the contrary, it's a profound experience, where every detail returns accompanied by the corresponding sensations. Imagine for a moment the weight and intensity of this review. It's not just remembering what happened, but feeling again every emotion, every impact your actions caused in other people. When you comfort someone, that warmth returns to you. When you humble someone, you feel the pain of humiliation. This process is described as inevitable because the soul, freed from the distractions of the body, can no longer escape the truth. It simply sees, and in that seeing it understands. Cayce said that this is the essence of judgment. There is no external voice pointing out errors or virtues. There is only full consciousness without masks. Many people upon hearing this might feel fear. After all, who among us has no regrets? Who doesn't carry grudges or attitudes they'd rather forget? But Cayce brought a comforting detail. This confrontation with the Book of Life is not meant to condemn, but to teach. He compared the experience to a child receiving a corrected test back. There are highlighted errors, yes, but there are also correct answers. The purpose is not to humiliate, but to show where we still need to learn. In this sense, Cayce's vision breaks with the idea of a punitive God. Instead, it reveals an educational universe, where each life is a classroom and each death a moment of evaluation. Most fascinating is that Cayce described this review as an interactive process. It's not just watching a movie of one's own life, it's being inside it, reliving it as both protagonist and spectator at the same time. This explains why many near-death accounts coincide with his vision. People say that in seconds, they saw their whole life flash before their eyes, accompanied by an instantaneous understanding of the effects of their choices. It's no coincidence. It's as if, at that moment, the Book of Life was partially opened, allowing a glimpse of what awaits each of us after the definitive transition. And what happens after this review? According to Cayce, the soul doesn't remain trapped in this state. After understanding the lessons of its last journey, it is led to planes of existence that correspond to its level of consciousness. In other words, what you carry within you, love, resentment, compassion, selfishness, determines the vibration you attract and the environment you will be led to. This idea is powerful because it shows us that heaven or hell are not geographical places, but internal states that become external realities. The Book of Life is just the doorway to this new stage. Now think about how this changes the way we live. If every gesture, every word, every choice will be reviewed by ourselves at some point, it makes no sense to continue living automatically without reflection. Cayce encouraged people to live more consciously, precisely because he knew that everything, absolutely everything, would come back before us. Even the most intimate thoughts, Those that no one heard, but that shaped our intention, are recorded. And here's an important detail. For Cayce, intention is as relevant as action. If you help someone only to be recognized, that intention also appears in the book. If you refuse an opportunity for generosity out of fear, that too is recorded. This point may seem harsh, but it also opens up a huge space for transformation. Because if everything is recorded, every small change already makes a difference. There's no need for great heroic deeds to improve the reading of our book. A sincere gesture of kindness, a request for forgiveness, a reconciliation, all of this rewrites how our story will be viewed. This perception can bring not only responsibility, but also hope. After all, while we are alive, we still hold the pen. Many asked Cayce, and what happens to someone who lived a life full of pain, mistakes, regrets? Will they be condemned upon seeing their book? His answer was always the same. No, no one is condemned, because the goal is not to punish, but to teach. If the soul sincerely perceives the mistakes it made, that very perception is already an advancement. It's like a student who gets a question wrong, but clearly understands the reason for the error. That understanding is more valuable than the illusion of a superficial correct answer. The book of life, therefore, is not the end. It is the preparation for what comes next. A curious detail is that Cayce associated this process with the Akashic Records, as we've already mentioned. But he went further. He said that these records don't just belong to the individual, but form a large web of information that connects all humanity. This means your life isn't just yours. Every choice affects the whole, and every page of your book intertwines with the pages of others. Thus, when reading the Book of Life, you not only review your isolated actions, but also understand how they influenced and were influenced by the collective. It's a cosmic vision of shared responsibility. And here I want to pause for a reflection. How many times do we think that our attitudes are unimportant, that we are just a tiny dot among billions? Cayce said the exact opposite. For the Book of Life, nothing is too small. A smile given to someone in despair might have changed the course of that person's life, and that impact will be shown. Similarly, a harsh word might have deeply marked someone's heart, and that weight will also appear. It's as if each page of the book is made not just of facts, but of invisible consequences that we will only fully see at this moment of review. Upon understanding this, you begin to look back and ask yourself, what marks am I leaving? What records will be there when my book opens? This question, though uncomfortable, is liberating, because while there's time, it's still possible to change the tone of the story. Edgar Cayce said that every life is an opportunity to write new pages, and that we are never limited only to what we have already done. The book is not a prison. It's an invitation to continue learning. And it's here that we begin to perceive the hidden beauty in this revelation. If at first the Book of Life may seem threatening, as we reflect, it reveals itself as a mirror that helps us grow. And perhaps this is the greatest secret Cayce tried to convey. Life is not a test to pass or fail. It is a path of continuous self-improvement, where every mistake is just a lesson not yet learned, and every success a confirmation of how much we have already evolved. So far, we've seen that the Book of Life is the starting point of this great review after death. But Edgar Cayce said that this process does not happen in solitude. Immediately after this deep review, the soul is received by what he called guides or spiritual counselors. They are not arbitrary or strange figures. On the contrary, they are often described as beings familiar to our essence, consciences that accompany us in different stages of learning. Some would call them angels, others masters, but for Cayce the most appropriate term would be instructors, because their role is not to judge but to guide. Imagine the scene. You have just reviewed your entire life, feeling firsthand the effects of each action. It's an intense moment, full of revelations. Immediately after, you are not alone to deal with it. These guides approach and help interpret what was seen. It's not just a list of hits and misses. It's a conversation, almost like a counseling session, where what has been learned and what still needs to be experienced in future incarnations is discussed. Cayce said, that this dialogue is as important as the review itself, because often we cannot, on our own, understand the deeper meaning of our experiences. These guides appear in different forms. Some souls perceive them as luminous figures, others as beloved deceased persons, and in some cases as masters of symbolic appearance linked to the individual's culture or belief. The common thread is that they all convey a sense of wisdom and welcome. There is no condemnation, there is no harshness, there is firmness, yes, but always accompanied by compassion. It's like a teacher looking at a student who made a mistake, but knows they have the potential to learn more. This detail changes everything in how we view what comes after death. And what exactly happens in this encounter? Cayce described that, after reviewing the Book of Life, the guides lead the soul to reflect on three fundamental questions. The first, what did you learn from the life you just lived? The second, what still needs to be learned? And the third, what will be the next step in your evolutionary journey? These three questions determine the soul's future, whether in another spiritual plane or in a new incarnation. It is at this moment that one understands that the Book of Life is not just about the past, but also about preparing the future. A curious detail Cayce mentioned is that often the soul, upon realizing its mistakes, itself asks for the opportunity to return to physical life to rectify what it failed to learn. This breaks a common idea that reincarnation would be an imposition. For Cayce, it is a voluntary act of the soul, a desire to continue the process of growth. Of course, this decision is guided by the spiritual counselors who show the possibilities and help choose the best path. But deep down, it is the consciousness itself that feels the need to evolve. This vision is powerful because it takes us out of the position of victims of an imposed destiny. It shows that we are active participants in our own process. The Book of Life does not condemn us, it awakens us. And spiritual guides do not control us, they guide us. This partnership between soul and spiritual masters forms the heart of the post-death experience described by Cayce. Now you might be asking, but who are these guides? Are they human beings who have lived before? Are they higher entities? Cayce responded that there are different types of guides. Some, yes, have been human and have reached levels of consciousness that allow them to help other souls. Others are higher intelligences, connected to the spiritual structure of the universe, who never needed to incarnate. And in some cases they can even present themselves symbolically, taking forms that facilitate the understanding of the soul going through the process. What matters is not the form, but the function, to guide, clarify, and prepare for the next step. A point that always intrigued those who listened to Cayce was, if these guides exist, why can't we see them while we are alive? His answer was direct. We do see them, but we rarely perceive them. How many times have you felt a strong intuition to avoid a bad choice? How many times has a silent voice seemed to push you in a better direction? For Cayce, these moments are signs of the guides at work. The difference is that, after death, this communication becomes clear, without interference from the rational mind. And what happens after this encounter with the guides? Cayce said that the soul can follow different paths, depending on the level of learning achieved. Some remain on spiritual planes of rest and study, assimilating what they have lived. Others prepare to reincarnate, choosing new challenges that help correct past mistakes. And there are those who, having reached a high level of consciousness, take on roles of helping other souls, becoming guides and instructors themselves. This process shows that life does not end, but continuously transforms into stages of learning. This idea of multiple paths also explains why different religious traditions describe the afterlife in varied ways. Some speak of heaven and hell, others of intermediate planes, still others of reincarnation. Cayce said that all these visions contain fragments of the truth, but none alone explains everything. The Book of Life and the spiritual guides are a way to unify these perceptions, showing that deep down, the experience is educational, not punitive. Now think about how this revelation resonates in practical life. If after death you will be received by guides who will help interpret your choices, why not start living today in a more conscious way, as if you were already preparing for that dialogue? It's as if every day we are writing a report that sooner or later will be read by ourselves and commented on by spiritual masters. This idea should not bring fear, but rather motivation. Because if every choice is a page, we can write better pages from now on. And there's an even deeper detail. Cayce said that the guides are not just there for after death, but that we can, in life, learn to consciously connect with them. This happens in moments of meditation, sincere prayer, inner silence. When we silence the noise of the world and listen carefully, we often feel a guidance that does not come from logic, but from something greater. It is in this space that the guides can manifest. Thus, the encounter after death is just the continuation of a relationship that has already begun, albeit subtly, while we live. This point is vital because it breaks the idea that everything will only be resolved later. The truth is that the book of life is already being written now, and the guides are already present, even if invisible. The afterlife is not a distant destination. It is just the natural sequence of what is already underway. And the more conscious we are of this in life, the smoother the transition will be when the time comes. We have reached the most delicate and, at the same time, most revealing point of Edgar Cayce's vision of the book of life. After reviewing every detail of existence and receiving guidance from spiritual guides, the soul faces a decision. What to do next? Cayce explained that there is no single mandatory path for everyone. Each soul, according to its spiritual maturity, its level of consciousness and its learnings, follows different directions. And it is here that we understand that life does not end with death. It merely transforms into a cycle of continuity and choice. Some souls, recognizing their mistakes and understanding the lessons they still need to learn, choose to return to the physical plane. This is reincarnation, not as a punishment, but as an opportunity to correct what was left unfinished. Imagine a student who takes a test, understands where they went wrong, and asks the teacher for another chance to answer. This is the logic according to Cayce. The soul perceives that it needs new experiences to grow, and Earth is the classroom where this learning can happen. The curious thing is that often the challenges of a new life are precisely the consequences of past failures. If someone misused power, they might return in a humble life to learn humility. If someone abused their health, they might return in a fragile body to learn the value of care. Not as punishment, but as an opportunity to balance. Other souls, however, do not need to reincarnate immediately. Cayce said that some remain on intermediate spiritual planes, which function as schools and hospitals for the soul. In these places, consciousness studies, strengthens itself, and prepares calmly before a new return. It is a period of assimilation. Think of a student who, after a difficult test, does not take another immediately, but goes through a period of review, reading, and rest. For the soul, this interval can be essential, especially when the previous life was marked by intense pain or very heavy experiences. And there are also those souls who reach such a high level of understanding that they no longer need to return to Earth, not because they are perfect, but because they have learned enough to help in another way. These souls take on roles as guides and instructors, participating in the journey of others. It's as if they form an invisible support network, helping humanity move forward. Cayce said that many of these beings have gone through several incarnations, have faced the challenges of physical life, and therefore deeply understand human difficulties. These are often the ones who present themselves as masters, saints, or even as that silent presence that guides our intuition in decisive moments. This range of possibilities shows that death is not a uniform end. It is merely a transition to the next stage, which can be a return, a rest, or a new role. What determines the path is not an external authority that decides arbitrarily, but the soul itself, in dialogue with its guides based on what it saw in the book of life. This vision removes the burden of fear and places personal responsibility at the center. In other words, we are the ones who build the next chapter with the choices we make now. And here is a fundamental point that Cayce emphasized. With each life, the soul carries with it not only its mistakes, but also its merits. We don't start from scratch in each incarnation. The accumulated learnings remain, even if we don't consciously remember them. That's why some people from an early age seem to have abilities or wisdom that cannot be explained by formal education. These are echoes of previous lives. Similarly, certain inexplicable fears or recurring difficulties can also be marks of past experiences that the soul still needs to resolve. But if the Book of Life records everything, a natural question arises. What do we take with us when we finally no longer need to reincarnate? Cayce said that we do not take possessions, titles, or external achievements. What remains is character. What remains is what we were able to develop in terms of love, compassion, wisdom, and service to others. This is the true legacy that transcends death and remains for eternity. Everything else, no matter how brilliant it may have seemed, dissolves. This idea may sound harsh, but it is also liberating, because it places the focus where it truly matters, on what we build within ourselves and on what we offer to the world. Now pause for a moment and think, if today were the day your Book of Life were opened, what would you see? More than that, how would you feel each page? This reflection, which Cayce invites us to make, should not generate fear, but awaken consciousness. Because we are still writing, there is still time to change, to reconcile, to love more, to forgive, to learn. No matter the age, no matter what has passed, as long as life continues, the pen is still in our hands. And perhaps herein lies the great message hidden in this revelation. The Book of Life is not just something that awaits us after death. It is already open now, being written at every moment. It is alive, and every decision, every thought, and every gesture become words on its pages. When Cayce spoke about this mystery, it was not to scare us, but to awaken us to the responsibility and opportunity of the present. Because deep down, the true judgment does not happen later. It is already happening now, in the reflection that our choices leave on ourselves and on others. This understanding even changes the way we look at aging. Many people, upon reaching 60, 70, or 80 years old, believe there's not much left to do, that the great pages of the book have already been written. But Cayce shows us the opposite. A single conscious decision can rewrite the meaning of an entire life. A gesture of reconciliation can erase decades of resentment. A word of forgiveness can transform the soul's burden. An act of love can balance years of selfishness. It's as if until the last breath, we still have the chance to write the most important chapter of all. And that's why this message is so powerful for those who have lived so long. Because time is not an enemy, but an ally. Time is the space given to us to write our pages with more consciousness, to prepare a lighter and more beautiful reading when the Book of Life opens. If death is inevitable, what we do until then is entirely moldable, and that is liberating. Before we conclude, I want to extend a simple invitation. If this message resonated with you, if it touched some part of your soul that is still seeking answers, please stay with us. This channel exists precisely to explore these great questions of life, death, and what comes next, always with clarity and depth. So leave your like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who also needs to hear this reflection. Because in some way, when we spread knowledge and inspiration, we are also writing a new luminous page in our own Book of Life. And remember, when the day comes for that book to open, there will be no surprises, only the truth of who we were reflected back to us. And most importantly, there's still time to write the most beautiful pages of your story.